Previously on Faking Michael.
Well, you know, sales of Michael Jackson's songs and albums have gone through the roof since his death.
The King of Pop is said to have left behind a mountain of material. There could be a whole new life just from these songs alone.
If we do release anything of unreleased material, it has to be fantastic and it can't damage in any way his legacy.
Bombshell exclusive. Michael Jackson recorded a whole new album of material in the fall of 2007 with Eddie Cascio at his home in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey.
But according to TMZ, Jackson's family says the tracks are fakes, sung by a Michael impersonator.
It didn't sound true. It just sounded like a ridiculous conspiracy theory. I kind of dismissed it.
Sony's Epic Records guarantees the album's authenticity, telling ABC News, "We have complete confidence in the results of our extensive research."
These vocals are Michael Jackson. They all say it's Michael, including me.
Fans will soon be able to judge for themselves. On Monday, one song will be released.
Breaking news. Everybody wanting a piece of Michael Jackson.
In episode 1, we heard about how prior to the premiere of Breaking News, I, and others, completely dismissed the Jackson family's claims that the vocals on the track would be fake. Every rational bone in my body told me that Sony would never consider doing such a thing, especially if the beneficiaries of Jackson's estate, his mother and children, had pleaded with them not to. But when I finally heard the track on November 8, 2010, it became clear that I was wrong. I felt sick. I was confused, and I was angry. Not only was I sure that Michael Jackson wasn't singing on Breaking News, I was pretty sure I knew who was. The tone, the vibrato, even the way he pronounced certain words, it sounded unmistakably to me like another singer, Jason Malachi. At the time, I was in close contact with a senior executive at Sony Music here in Australia. And so the second I finished listening to Breaking News, I sent a short, blunt email to him. "This better be a publicity stunt," I wrote, "because that's not Michael Jackson. That's Jason Malachi." The executive emailed straight back, saying that he'd look into it and get back to me. While awaiting his reply, I decided to go online and find out what everyone else was saying about the vocals. Would I be the only one who heard Jason, not Michael, on Breaking News? Was I losing my mind or my hearing? I was about to find out.
I just listened to Breaking News, the new Michael Jackson song. That's not Michael. That's not MJ, man. They can't bullshit me, man. That's not Michael's voice.
A lot of controversy about this song, and I don't think it's him. I really don't.
The new Michael Jackson track called Breaking News. I've got breaking news for you guys. It's not Michael Jackson. It's this other singer, Jason Malachi.
The fans are aware of a singer called Jason Malachi, and we believe that he has laid down the vocals for
The King
these
of Pop
songs.
is not something to mess around with. You take a song and you make us believe it's him.
The record company are saying that it is indeed him, but to the fans, it doesn't sound like him.
Everybody, all the fans, everybody's saying that they don't believe it's Michael.
It's not Michael. What the fuck are they trying to do?
On Breaking News is not Michael's voice, it's Jason Malachi's. I'm flabbergasted. I'd never thought they'd actually do something like this.
I mean, it's definitely not Michael Jackson, I guarantee you. You don't believe me, check out this guy called Jason Malachi.
Family members believe it, I believe it, I know it's true. This song is fake. And if we're gonna stand for that, I don't know what to think about the music industry anymore.
We can't even be sure if it was composed or written by him or whatever, because it's not him singing.
I urge you guys out there to cancel all your pre-orders for the new album. Do not buy it whatsoever. It's a total sham.
It's a slap in the face to the fans, and it's a slap in the face to Michael himself.
It's so obviously not Michael
What
Jackson.
resembles Michael, but it's not him, man.
It doesn't deserve to be released with Michael's name on it.
That ain't no Michael Jackson.
Fans all around the world were saying the same thing. This was not Michael Jackson. A lot of fans had raised the same theory that I posed to my contact at Sony. that the only rational explanation was that this was some kind of bizarre publicity stunt. Whatever the truth was, the fact that most people felt the same way that I did reassured me that I was not going crazy. Before long, my phone started to blow up with texts and calls from friends who'd heard the song and who also didn't think it was Michael. I recently spoke to two of those friends, Marnie and Q, and asked them to recount their reaction to hearing breaking news for the first time.
The first seconds of hearing that song, my stomach dropped.
The very first seconds of those vocals, oh man, I just remember crying so hard.
I thought it must be a joke. It has to be a joke. How is this? And then I had to remind myself I'm on the official Sony website listening to a song. It says Michael Jackson. It says breaking news by Michael Jackson. It's not possible. It's not possible.
And it was like the instant. The song had not even finished or anything. It was like as soon as it happened. Because at that point, and knowing instantly that those vocals were not Michael Jackson vocals, that all those crazy reports that the Jackson family had said there's someone singing on these songs that are not Michael Jackson were actually true. And Sony was going ahead with this, and this was fraud, and they didn't even care.
But it wasn't just fans reacting this way. Following the November 8 premiere of Breaking News, a number of Jackson's former collaborators began speaking out about the track. Jackson's drummer of 30 years, Jonathan Moffett, and longtime guitarist Jennifer Batten both said that Breaking News didn't sound like Michael to them. Producer Rodney Jerkins, who worked extensively on Jackson's final studio album, Invincible, said the same thing.
It doesn't sound like him to me.
Michael Bearden, who served as the musical director of Jackson's ill-fated This Is It tour, said that he couldn't tell if Breaking News was sung by Jackson or not, while former Sony vice president Corey Rooney was adamant that the track was fake. In the same way that many of Jackson's fans had when they first heard it, Rooney pointed the finger at Jason Malachi as the person he believed was actually singing. Even the Jackson family suspected that Jason was involved. Michael's sister, LaToya Jackson, recalls that following the premiere of Breaking News, Michael's daughter, Paris, called her in a frenzy, telling her that the voice on the track was not her father's.
Paris called me and she says, Auntie LaToya, you gotta listen to this. This is not Daddy's voice. And she played it for me. I go, Paris, you're right. It was not his voice. And she was so concerned about it that she says, we gotta put a stop to this. We must put a stop to this. And I'm not gonna let them get by with this because she loves her father. And she didn't want to see that out there when it wasn't her father's voice. Yeah. And she went on to say, this is the person who impersonates him, and he's very good with it.
Paris reportedly told LaToya that the person impersonating her father on Breaking News was Jason Malachi. Michael's nephew, TJ Jackson, felt the same way.
Sounds like Jason Malachi to me. The vibrato is a dead giveaway that it's not my uncle.
So who is Jason Malachi? And why were Jackson's fans, family, and a former Sony executive pointing the finger at him as the singer of Sony's new Michael Jackson track? To answer both of those questions, we need to go back to September of 2007, 3 years before the world premiere of Breaking News. At the time, very few people had ever heard of Jason Malachi. But when a radio station mistakenly broadcast one of his songs as a new track by the king of pop, Jason shot to 15 minutes of fame. In an interview with a podcast called Soft Pass, Jason explains.
Back in 2007, I had a song. It was a pop, like Latino, like type feel, like, you know, like a salsa type song.
question, so what's the answer? Will you be my girl forever? Damn,
We hadn't released the record, we're still working on it, but it leaked to a Pittsburgh radio station.
ready? Let's go and plan us a wedding.
They started playing it, and then it started spreading like wildfire. However, the reason why it was spreading like wildfire is everyone was saying that it was the new Michael Jackson record.
In 2007, when Mamacita was making waves on the radio, it was known that the real Michael Jackson was working on a new album. So when radio stations played Mamacita, reporting that it was a new song by the King of Pop, many listeners were none the wiser, accepting it as Jackson's musical comeback. Even when Michael's manager issued a statement confirming that Michael was not the singer, some fans refused to believe it. The confusion lasted for 2 weeks until celebrity news site TMZ confirmed that the singer was Jason Malachi.
My camp was trying to like clarify, say, no, it's not Michael, this is Jason Malachi. But what happened was TMZ, they caught wind of it and they did like a whole story on me and everything. They did 2 articles on me. They actually had it on the actual television show.
Following the confirmation that Mamacita was sung by Jason, not Michael, Jason became a talking point within the Michael Jackson fan community. In fact, Jason himself was a member of the community, engaging in conversations with fellow fans on various Michael Jackson websites between 2008 and 2009. And so when Breaking News premiered in 2010, Jason had already been a household name in the world of Michael Jackson for several years. We'll discuss Jason further in future episodes. But for now, let's go back to November 8, 2010, the day that Breaking News premiered. As the day progressed, the outrage among fans continued to build. The general consensus was that the vocals on Breaking News were fake, but not everyone felt the same way. From the moment the track went live, reporter Roger Friedman, who'd been writing about the Casio tracks for 6 months, repeatedly insisted that the vocals were indeed Jackson's. In a series of articles, Friedman offered several excuses for the way Breaking News sounded, including that Jackson had merely laid down a guide vocal, that there may have been a problem when Sony uploaded the track to michaeljackson.com, and that the version set to appear on the album may sound more like Michael. Producer Teddy Riley, who had remixed a number of Casio tracks for the album, including Breaking News, gave several interviews in which he defended the authenticity of the vocals. Jackson's former manager, Frank DeLeo, said that he had no doubt that the vocals were authentic because he'd spoken to Michael several times by phone while he was recording them with Eddie Casio in 2007. Eddie's brother, Frank Casio, also came out in support of Breaking News. In several statements posted via Facebook, Frank insisted that all of the lead vocals on his brother's song were sung by Michael, pleading with fans to enjoy the special moment and to embrace the track. But for me, that simply wasn't possible. And so I called my friend Jamin to express my grief over what was happening. You heard from Jamin in episode 1, when he recalled that before the premiere of Breaking News, he dismissed the Jackson family's claims that the vocals would be fake.
I just thought it would be completely unreasonable and unfathomable that Sony or the estate would release fake vocals. I thought the chances of that were so low. It was just a crazy thing to think about.
Jamin is a huge MJ fan, and I was sure that he and I would be on the same page regarding the vocals on Breaking News, and that together we would come up with a plan of attack to prevent the track from being released. But when I called Jamin, things didn't go as I had expected. At the time that Breaking News premiered, Jamin was at work, and although he did try to listen to Breaking News in between customers, he hadn't been able to give the track his full, undivided attention. But even without properly listening to the track, Jamin continued to dismiss the notion that the vocals could be fake. Jamin recalls the events of November 8, 2010 from his perspective.
I streamed the song. I was in the middle of, I was working at Optus, like a mobile phone shop at the time, so it was noisy, people everywhere. I had crappy earphones on. I remember hearing it and thinking, this doesn't really, there's a lot of voices there. But there was no doubt in my mind that it was him. I was like, yeah, Michael's got to be in there. It's got to be him. There's just a lot of voices. There's a lot of production. I can't really figure it out. I'll listen to it again later when I have more time.
See ya.
I get on the bus on the way home from work. I listen to it again. I wasn't familiar with who Jason Malachi was. Then, Damien, you ring me and you're angry at me. You're like, what are you talking
about? It's not him. How come you can't tell it's Jason?
Like, you were like, I'd never heard you before. The way I would describe how you spoke to me on that day would be like panicked and angry. And I was making you more angry and I was making you more panicked because you were trying to really logically explain to me that this is not Michael Jackson's voice on breaking news.
Jamin, it's Jason. It's not MJ. It's Jason.
What are you talking about?
Jamin, it's not MJ.
And I kept saying to you that that's impossible because it's Michael. What are you talking about?
It sounds like him to me.
I promise you it's not.
That's crazy. How could that ever happen? How could Sony allow that?
I know it sounds crazy, but check out Jason Malachi. You'll see what I'm talking about.
So we left that phone call very frustrated. I left the phone call feeling like you had gone insane. I truly thought, and this is the honest truth, when you told me about this fake song stuff, I was like, I love my friend Damien and he's so truthful and knowledgeable, but I don't think I can believe what he's telling me here. And I wanted to believe you. But you know what? I've been thinking about this since then a lot, and I think there's two layers to it. I think there's the one layer is me like not understanding Malachi and that stuff, but I think there is a deeper layer of me at that point, subconsciously, I wasn't ready to accept that his own estate and Sony Music would be complicit in such a devastating artistic fraud. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to enjoy the music. I'd been waiting a decade for this moment.
Later that day, I heard back from my contact at Sony Australia. The one I had emailed asking whether or not this was a publicity stunt. He told me that this was not a publicity stunt and that Sony in New York were insisting that they had confirmed the vocals were Jackson's. I immediately replied to his email, telling him that he should clear his schedule because I was going to call him. Sony needed to know exactly how fans felt about the song. He agreed to take a call from me early the next morning, on November 9, 2010. Joining me on that call was my friend Marnie. Marnie is one of the people that you heard from earlier when she gave me her reaction to hearing breaking news for the first time. My contact at Sony already knew Marnie. He had crowned her as Australia's biggest Michael Jackson fan in a contest that Sony had run a couple of years earlier. Here is Marnie's recollection of that call with Sony Australia.
So the first thing I remember is that I think I had the feeling that I was just going to let you speak, do all the talking and just chime in with, you know, any extras that I needed to. And I really felt like, you know, I was scared shitless because, you know, how do you tell a Sony executive that what he's releasing is, it's not Michael Jackson? Like, how do you tell a music expert that, you know, his colleagues have done the wrong thing? And I remember you saying that it was a monumental fuck up or something to that extent. And what is Sony, what actions are Sony going to take to rectify this? Because it's obviously not Michael. It's a collective agreement around the world that it's not Michael. What's Sony doing?
At the end of our call, the Sony executive asked me to round up all of the statements that people were making online about breaking news and send them to him in an email. Sony in the US, he said, were holding a meeting about the Michael album the following day, and that he would have those statements presented during that meeting so that our voices could be heard. Immediately following our call with Sony, I decided to call the office of Estate Co-Executor John Branca to discuss the fan community's reaction to breaking news. When it comes to the administration of an estate, an executor has a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interests of the beneficiaries. And in the case of Michael's estate, it was being reported that the beneficiaries, his mother and children, were against the release of the Casio tracks. I figured that Branca realised this without a fan from Australia calling him, but by the same token, I figured I had nothing to lose. So I picked up the phone and called his office.
How can I direct your call?
Hi, I'd like to speak to John Branca, please.
I'm sorry, Mr. Branca is unavailable.
The receptionist that answered my call told me that Branca wasn't available, suggesting that it might be easier if I emailed him. And so she gave me his email address, and the second the call ended, I started typing. Dear Mr. Branca, I was hoping to speak with you as soon as possible regarding the utter mess that is the Michael Jackson fan community right now, in reaction to breaking news and the blatant obviousness that the lead vocals on that track are not Michael Jackson's. This is a major problem. It is our duty to act immediately and fix this. Michael's legacy is too great to let this happen. If you can make time to phone me as soon as possible, that would be greatly appreciated. I am based in Australia and you can find my phone number below. Best regards, Damien Shields. My concerns and actions were echoed by author Joseph Vogel. We heard from Vogel in episode 1, when discussing how the estate reached out to him to ask if he had any inside information about the Casio tracks.
So they asked me, like, do you know anything about these tracks? And I said no, because the people that I talked to didn't know anything about those songs.
But upon hearing breaking news on November 8, 2010, Vogel felt compelled to email the estate once more. The following is a shortened excerpt from that email, addressed to Estate Representative Karen Langford.
Dear Karen, I debated about whether to send this email, but here goes for what it's worth. I am the furthest thing from a conspiracy theorist, but the lead vocal on that new song just does not sound like Michael Jackson. I could be wrong, and I really hope I am, but as I peruse MJ fan boards, fans that were extremely excited about this album and song, they overwhelmingly feel the same as I do. There are certain nuances to Michael's voice and intonations that just sound off. Of all the unreleased songs I have heard, only one other raised these red flags. It was a song a few years ago called Mamacita, and it turned out to be by an impersonator named Jason Malachi. I don't know if my opinion is useful or not, but I thought I would offer it since you asked about these tracks last week. Best, Joe.
In episode 1, we heard from award-winning investigative journalist and Jackson expert Charles Thompson regarding his dismissal of the media reports about fake vocals.
It didn't sound true. It just sounded like a ridiculous conspiracy theory. I kind of dismissed it.
But when he heard breaking news, Thompson felt conflicted. The vocal didn't sound like Michael Jackson to him. Like Vogel, Thompson didn't want to seem like some kind of crazed conspiracy theorist, and was initially cautious of outwardly crying fraud based on his ears alone. Instead, he opted to keep his thoughts to himself until more evidence, one way or the other, was presented. Thompson recalls.
I remember listening to it and thinking, well, it doesn't sound like Michael, but So there were two conflicting parts of me, which is kind of like me as a fan and me as a journalist. Me as a fan was thinking, well, this does not sound like Michael Jackson. And I, as a very rational, logical person who needs evidence all the time, and the kind of journalist side of my brain is going, yeah, but what's the point? For years, we'd been told this story about every time Michael records an album, he records 80 or 100 songs. You know, there's all this material sitting in the vault. So the dominant thought was, what would be the point of releasing fake songs? Why would they take the risk? Why would a company with as much to lose reputationally as Sony, why would they take this risk, this gigantic risk, on something that they really don't need to do? If they've got hundreds of real songs sitting around, what would be the point? You wouldn't even take the risk. So initially my thought process was trying to rationalize what I was hearing. It was the journalist side of my brain trying to rationalize against what the fan side of my brain was telling me, which was that this does not sound like Michael.
The Jackson family, however, didn't need to rationalize. This was their brother, the lead singer of the Jackson 5.
The Jackson 5.
The Jackson 5.
Michael and his family had recorded in the studio and performed live on stage together hundreds upon hundreds of times over the span of 35 years. If anyone knew his voice, it was the Jackson family, and they were steadfast in their belief that the voice on breaking news did not belong to Michael, taking to social media to raise their voice against the Casio tracks. Michael's brother, Randy Jackson, said that he'd bet his life on the fact that it wasn't Michael's voice. Jermaine Jackson said that he and his family had tried to warn Sony that Michael's fans wouldn't be fooled by fake songs. And perhaps the most serious claims came from Michael's oldest brother, Jackie Jackson, who said that both he and estate co-executor John McClane had insisted for many weeks that the Casio tracks should not be released, but that unfortunately their concerns were not taken seriously. Prior to the release of Breaking News, the media had reported that McClane was calling the Casio tracks fake, and Jackie's tweet confirmed those reports. As we established in episode 1, the estate has two co-executors, John Branca and John McClane. Branca is a lawyer, best known for his deal-making skills, while McClane made his mark as a record executive, manager, and producer. Of the two, McClane is the music guy. So if McClane really was insisting that the Casio tracks, including Breaking News, be excluded from the album, and if his concerns were, quote, not taken seriously, this raised yet another red flag. How much more power did Branca have than McClane? And why was Branca seemingly overruling McClane and the Jackson family in their push to ditch the Casio tracks? While Jackie Jackson revealed that he and McClane had unsuccessfully petitioned for the Casio tracks to be removed from the album, Jackson's nephew, Terrell, confirmed that he too had tried to do the same thing, saying, quote,
I tried so hard to prevent this craziness, but they wouldn't listen.
Terrell revealed that he was in the studio with producer Teddy Riley the day the Casio tracks were delivered, and that he heard the raw vocals without any music, saying, quote,
I am shocked that things have gotten this far. This is ridiculous. How they constructed these songs is very sneaky and sly. Many people who have worked on this project either have strong doubts and questions, while others know the truth, yet decided to turn and look the other way, with their hands out for money. I will never look the other way. Right is right. Truth is truth. Facts are facts, and it will come out. I know my uncle's voice, and something is seriously wrong when you have immediate family saying it's not him. I have strong, undeniable points. They can't give me answers, yet continue to move forward with lies and deception. Sounding like Michael Jackson and being Michael Jackson are two different things.
Even reality TV star and longtime friend of the Jackson family, Kim Kardashian, raised her voice against the Casio tracks, supporting Terrell with the following statement via Twitter.
The new song claiming to be Michael Jackson is fake. Thanks Terrell Jackson for setting the record straight. Crazy people would stoop so low.
As more and more red flags were raised about breaking news, more and more people came out in protest of its release. At the time, a group of fans in France created an online petition against the Casio tracks, which was signed by more than 7,000 people, while British fan site MJ Vibe hand-delivered letters of protest directly to Sony's London headquarters. The founder of MJ Vibe, who goes by the name Pez Jax, recalls.
We were livid. So I set up an email address, that's not MJ, at mjvibe.com. And I put out a call to all the fans online saying, send me your emails and I'm going to take every single one down to Sony. And we did that.
It's important to remember that those who were protesting against breaking news were the very same people that Sony and the estate should have been able to rely on for support. Dedicated fans who'd spent years, and in some cases decades, listening to the King of Pop. Yet now, instead of supporting the so-called new Michael Jackson song, the majority of fans were making it clear that they didn't even believe it was Michael. Surely, if Sony and the estate were paying attention to the impassioned feedback of their target audience, they had to be reconsidering their plan to release Breaking News and other Casio tracks on the Michael album. The period immediately following the premiere of Breaking News was a whirlwind. I don't think I got any sleep, instead spending every waking moment trying to stop this madness from moving forward. But it felt like my efforts, and the efforts of others, were falling on deaf ears. As the days continued to pass by, my email to estate co-executor John Branca remained unanswered, and I hadn't heard anything back from my contact at Sony Australia since my call with him. Other fans were having the same issues. Getting a response from the powers that be was like getting blood from a stone. But then, on the 11th of November 2010, 3 days after the premiere of Breaking News, the estate finally broke its silence, making an official statement regarding the Casio tracks.
There is nothing more important to the estate than Michael's music, his legacy, and his fans.
Written by the estate's attorney, Howard Weitzman, the statement begins with an overview of the Michael album's creation and the events that led to the questions regarding the vocals on the Casio tracks.
As the Michael album was being put together, it was decided to bring Teddy Riley on board to work on several songs, including Breaking News, a song Michael recorded while living at the Casio family home with his children. Riley produced and submitted Breaking News to Sony for inclusion on the album. At that time, no one ever mentioned that the vocals we heard on the Casio songs might not be Michael. After the tracks were submitted to Sony, 3 of these Casio songs were selected to be on the album, and Breaking News was one of the 3. The day after the submission and selection of the album tracks, for the very first time, the authenticity of Michael's vocals on the Casio tracks was questioned. Because of these questions, I was immediately asked by co-executors John Branca and John McClane to conduct an investigation regarding the authenticity of the lead vocals on the Casio tracks.
In the statement, Weitzman goes on to detail the steps that he had taken as part of his investigation, starting with a list of producers and audio engineers who Weitzman claimed had all agreed that the vocals were definitely Michael's.
6 of Michael's former producers and engineers who had worked with Michael over the past 30 years, Bruce Swedien, Matt Forger, Stuart Brawley, Michael Prince, Dr. Freeze, and Teddy Riley, were all invited to a listening session to hear the raw a cappella vocals of the Casio tracks. They all confirmed that the vocal was definitely Michael.
Jackson's former musical director, Greg Phillinganes, tour vocalist, Dorian Holley, and others reportedly confirmed the same.
The estate then retained one of the best-known forensic musicologists in the nation to listen to the vocals without any instrumental accompaniment. This expert performed waveform analysis, an objective scientific test used to determine audio authenticity, and reported that all of the lead vocals analyzed were the voice of Michael Jackson. Sony Music conducted their own investigation by hiring yet a second well-respected forensic musicologist who also compared the a cappella lead vocals from the Casio tracks against previously released vocals of Michael's, and found that it was Michael Jackson's voice on all sets of the raw vocals.
Despite all of this, Weitzman revealed that he made one last phone call as part of his investigation.
Just to be absolutely certain, I contacted Jason Malachi, a young singer who some persons had wrongfully alleged was a sound-alike singer that was hired to sing on the Casio tracks, and I confirmed that he had no involvement with this project whatsoever.
Given the overwhelming evidence, Weitzman says, Sony believed, quote, without reservation, that the vocals on the Casio tracks were authentic, and decided to include 3 of them on the album. Weitzman concludes his statement by reiterating that there is nothing more important to the estate than Jackson's music, his legacy, and his fans.
Ultimately, Michael's fans will be the judges of these songs, as they always are. We take all fan comments very seriously. Michael's fans are extraordinary in their quest for accuracy and their passions to raise their voices in a search for truth. We join with them in our care and concern for Michael.
From my perspective, Weitzman's statement felt like a patronizing and disingenuous slap in the face. In one breath, he was saying that there was nothing more important to the estate than Jackson's music, his legacy, and his fans, and that the estate stands with fans as we raise our voices in a search for the truth. But I was a fan, and I didn't feel like the estate was standing with me at all. The very thing that I, and thousands of fans like me, were raising our voices against was the Casio tracks. We felt they were not Michael's music, and that releasing them would damage his legacy. While the majority of fans still believed that the Casio tracks were fake, regardless of Weitzman's efforts to convince us otherwise, his statement did lead some people to change their position on the tracks. Among those persuaded by Weitzman's statement was writer Joseph Vogel. As we heard earlier in this episode, when Vogel first heard breaking news, he emailed the estate to inform them that the vocals didn't sound like Michael Jackson to him.
The lead vocal on that new song just does not sound like Michael Jackson.
But 2 days later, Vogel published an article via the Huffington Post titled The Inside Story Behind Michael Jackson's Controversial New Song and Album, in which he concluded that the vocals were indeed Jackson's. Vogel recalls how the evidence cited in Howard Weitzman's statement led him to take that position in his article.
You know, when that evidence is presented to you early on, like that was compelling to me. I mean, I thought, okay, look, they did this very exhaustive search into its origins and into breaking down its components through like a forensic analysis, this elaborate process that they went through to verify their authenticity. His engineers, his, people that worked with him seem like, they overwhelmingly think it's him. All of that was extremely compelling evidence to me. And so given that evidence, I went forward with reviewing it as if it were all original Michael Jackson stuff.
In the article, Vogel acknowledges that the estate had a lot to lose if the songs were fraudulent, writing that it would be reckless of them to risk their credibility by releasing fake songs. Vogel explains that many of the engineers and producers mentioned in Weitzman's statement as having confirmed the authenticity of the tracks were the same people he'd come to know and trust while researching for his book. For this reason, Vogel felt comfortable that, if they really did confirm the vocals were Jackson's, they probably were.
These sources that I had were great, like they'd been the same people that I talked to that were in the studio with Michael, that worked closely with him. And so I felt based on that, I could confidently say, okay, yeah, it sounds weird, but there could be a variety of explanations for that. And so, that's what I went with at that time.
In his article, Vogel went on to offer some of those explanations. Perhaps the vocals sounded weird because Michael hadn't warmed his voice up prior to recording them. Or because the vocals were recorded in Eddie Cassio's basement and not in a world-class studio. Maybe the confusion had stemmed from the fact that the songs were just demos, that Jackson had merely laid down a guide vocal, and that another singer had filled in some of the background vocals because Jackson had died before he was able to record them himself. Vogel concludes his article by writing that the songs that comprise the Michael album, including the Cassio tracks, are merely fragments of an unfinished vision. They aren't the polished material that people are used to hearing from Jackson, writes Vogel, but they are him. And that based on Howard Weitzman's investigation, Jackson's closest friends and former collaborators felt that his fans deserved to hear them. Upon their publication, the contents of Joseph Vogel's article and Howard Weitzman's statement were reported by media around the world.
And they talked to many people who worked with Michael Jackson over the years, artists, producers, arrangers, recording engineers, and they played the songs for forensic musicologists, 2 independent musicologists, and they both came back with the same conclusion, that it was undoubtedly Michael Jackson. So I think everybody here did what they were supposed to do. The family had these concerns, and they raised them as well they should have. Then the estate did what it should have done, which was to clear it up.
2 independent forensic musicologists had determined it, and a host of Jackson's former collaborators had unanimously confirmed it. Or had they?
I have read the statement from the MJ estate, and I have to say that it's just more bullshit.
Those are the words of former Sony Vice President Corey Rooney. In a series of Facebook posts, Rooney claimed that he had attended the listening session mentioned in Howard Weitzman's statement, and that most of the people in that listening session did not believe the vocals were Jackson's.
I was in that room, and the majority of the people mentioned did not agree that it was MJ. Some felt it sounded like him, but all agreed that there was nothing there that was consistent with any MJ habits, like finger snaps, headphone bleeding, foot stomping, or just simple things like his voice asking for another take.
Jackson's nephew, Terrell, corroborated Rooney's claims, insisting that he too was in that listening session, and that Weitzman's version of events was not accurate.
There are many inaccuracies and omissions in that statement. For one, I was also in that meeting, and that was not the outcome. You will hear my story, because this is way too important for my uncle's legacy. The truth will prevail.
Despite the ongoing objections of Jackson's family and fans, Sony and the estate moved forward with the project, releasing the album, including 3 Cassio tracks, on December 14, 2010.
The album many Michael Jackson fans have been waiting for. Michael hit store shelves today, but some are outraged, saying the music company is just trying to cash in on the king of pop's death. Eyewitness News reporter Melissa McBride was there as they staged a protest.
They're speaking out against Sony's release of the new Michael Jackson album, and they say they're speaking up for Michael. Producer Eddie Cascio, seen here on Oprah.com last week, says Michael recorded some of the songs on the new album in Cassio's home studio.
Eddie, there have been some questions, about, first of all, that this people saying that this isn't Michael's voice. What can you tell us about that?
He tells Oprah the vocals on it are Michael's voice.
I can tell you that it is Michael's voice. He recorded right there in my basement.
But diehard fans aren't buying what Cascio has to say.
I don't think it's him. I really don't.
They can't bullshit me, man. That's not Michael's voice. This song is fake. And if we're gonna stand for that, I don't know what to think about the music industry anymore.
Sony's Epic Records guarantees the album's authenticity.
Sony says Michael is the first release of Michael Jackson material in 9 years.
Telling ABC News, we have complete confidence in the results of our extensive research, as well as the accounts of those who were in the studio with Michael, that the vocals on the new album are his own.
Michael, the brand new album from the greatest artist of all time. Out now.
As we've heard throughout this episode, from the moment the breaking news was premiered online, countless people, including me, suspected that Jason Malachi, not Michael Jackson, was singing on the Casio tracks.
The fans are aware of a singer called Jason Malachi.
Jason Malachi.
And we believe that he has laid down the vocals for these songs.
You don't believe me? Check out this guy called Jason Malachi.
Jason Malachi.
Jason Malachi.
And you'll see what I mean.
And on the 14th of December 2010, the same day that the Michael album hit stores across the US, those suspicions were further validated when Jason's former producer, Tony Curtis, spoke out against the Casio tracks, proclaiming in a series of explosive YouTube posts that Jason, not Michael, was indeed the vocalist. The following are Tony's own words taken from those YouTube posts. Quote, "It is so sad with all that Michael gave to music that his record label would repay him by disrespecting his memory like this. I know the vocals on Breaking News are Jason Malachi. I've studied Michael for years, and I've produced Jason's vocals for years, and I can tell every detail of their vocals apart. Jason can only fool himself into thinking that he sounds like Michael Jackson. Michael's kids are right. As they said, that's not their daddy's voice. And how are you going to tell Michael Jackson's mother what her own son sounds like? She knows. If I knew how to get in touch with the Jackson family, I would, because this is really wrong. I'm not going to go to the media because I don't want money, fame, or anything. I only want justice for Michael's music. Don't put out fake recordings and tell people it's Michael. I'm only speaking out on these recordings because I know, without a doubt, it's Jason." But even after the album was released, and even after Tony Curtis had spoken out, the debate surrounding the Casio tracks continued, and countless questions remained unanswered. Clearly, there was more to this than I could learn by simply sitting behind my computer screen. I knew how I felt, and how thousands upon thousands of people like me felt, but did that actually prove anything? A small group of people were constantly telling me that it didn't. "It's just your opinion," they'd say. But were they right? Could I just be part of a large group of conspiracy theorists with no actual evidence to back up our crazy theory? In reality, other than what our ears told us, we had no evidence. And so, I decided I was going to try to get to the bottom of it, for real, by conducting my own investigation. I had so many questions. How and why did Sony and the estate end up with a collection of songs that didn't sound like Michael Jackson? When the Jackson family raised questions about the vocals, Why didn't Sony and the estate err on the side of caution and replace the Casio tracks that were selected for the album with songs that were undoubtedly Michael? What really went down behind the scenes? Were the questions over the authenticity of the tracks just one giant misunderstanding? Or did Eddie Casio ask Jason Malachi to record vocals in the style of Michael Jackson and then defraud Sony and the estate with a collection of fake songs? And so I started reaching out to people, explaining to them that I was searching for the truth regarding the Casio tracks. And to my surprise, slowly but surely, people started responding. Before long, I had received invitations to meet with several of Michael's former producers and members of the Jackson family. They had information they wanted to share about the Casio tracks. And so I booked a flight to Los Angeles, told them I was coming, and flew to the other side of the world, hoping that when I arrived in LA, they would remain true to their word. And they did. In the next episode of Faking Michael.
I met with Teddy, and at the time, he was approached by the state to start working on a Michael Jackson project.
The first project will be an album of never-before-released recordings, which is due out in November.
I think Sony really wanted to make sure that they included songs that Michael was actively working on.
I came into the studio, they handed me a bunch of songs.
And it all just went downhill very quickly.
So when we played the records, it didn't sound right. We just knew something was wrong. And Teddy knew.
I remember him calling me, like whispering on the phone, say, "Have you heard these tracks? They're not even him."
That was like the dagger in the back.
Nobody cared about Michael. Nobody cared about Michael's ideas. All it was about the money.
I would just look at him. I was like, I don't understand why you even wasting your time with this. Like, it's not even him, so why even go through with it?
I just wanted to sound like him.
The first thing he said, he goes, "Finally, something I know is Michael." That's the first thing he said.
Faking Michael is a production of Oath Media, which is researched, written and narrated by me, Damian Shields. Original score, sound design and mixing by Dan Villalobos. Additional research by James Allais and Jamin Bull, and the teams at the MJ Cast and A Truth Untold. Artwork by Stephen Ward. If you enjoy the Faking Michael podcast, please consider rating, reviewing and sharing it. Faking Michael is an independent piece of investigative reporting. All source material is used in a limited and transformative way for the purposes of commentary, criticism, demonstration and education in accordance with fair use guidelines. Some of that material has been edited for clarity and time. If you'd like to contact the makers of this podcast, support our cause, or order a copy of the Faking Michael book, please visit our website at fakingmichael.com.